Okay, welcome to our podcast, Hāfu Voices. Today, I'm really happy to invite you to the episode number 2, and it's the first interview. So today, I have the pleasure to invite Ken Duenwald, and he is calling from Diamond Bar, which is in Southern California. So thank you very much, Ken, for being here with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes, me too.
Mhm.
So I my first question would be obviously is to hear from you a little bit, to hear about who you are, maybe Ken, and what half are you? Because I am French and Japanese, but it's not
Mhm.
you're not the same. And also, yes, anything you would like to share.
Yeah, so as you've stated already, Yuko, my name is Ken Duenwald. I was born and raised in San Francisco, California, and I now live in Diamond Bar in the Los Angeles area in Southern California. I am half Japanese from my mother's side, who she is originally from Saitama Prefecture in Greater Tokyo, and I'm half Caucasian from my father, who is from South Dakota in the United States, largely German and Irish ancestry. My 23andMe results, I think, maybe list about like a half dozen other European origins on from his side, but German, Irish, German, as you can tell from my last name, and then Irish from my grandmother's side, my paternal grandmother's side. Those two make up the largest origin for in terms of like my background from my Caucasian side. So yeah,
Wow.
that's mhm,
So that's pretty diverse. There is a Japanese side, the American side, and then Irish and German. For the
mhm.
most part. And so I'm curious to hear which country or maybe which culture do you feel the closest to right now?
Well, I mean, I'd grown up in the United States, so American culture, probably, I think, just because that's how I've surrounded myself with. Japanese, of course, I'm close to that as well. My mother being an immigrant from Japan. Um, I tell, it's funny, I tell a lot of people in the US, I'm not like I'm of European origin, but I am not culturally German or so the joke is it's kind of funny when it comes to like Ireland, like there we have a lot of Irish Americans in the United States, and a lot of Irish Americans will claim that they're super Irish because they're very angry and they love to drink and they love go that kind of stuff. And but I think I don't know the first thing about being culturally Irish. I do love potatoes, for example, which is a big deal in Ireland. That was actually the reason why my grandmother's ancestors came to the US was the famine way back. So but yeah, I would tell people like, yeah, I'm of German and Irish descent. I don't know the first thing about being either of those. If I were to be living in Ireland or if I were to be living in Germany, I'd be completely lost. So, I mean, culturally, just American because I grew up in America. But I think as we'll probably get into later, Japanese for sure. That having been kind of a more recent thing, my mother being from there.
Yes, and thank you for sharing this subtlety about yes the difference between our origins. So yes, you have European origins, but also there is a cultural your cultural sensitivity, which is since you American, since you grew up in this country, but you also mentioned that yes, Japanese culture is also present because of your mother, and
Mhm.
you will share with us, I think, in the next question because that's connected to it. So yes,
Yeah.
regarding maybe your experience as a half, being a half, I'm curious to hear about what have been your journey growing up as a Hafu in the United States, if I understand, and also do you speak Japanese? Have you lived in Japan? What is your connection with Japan? in addition
Hmm.
to your mother.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess to start off, I have never lived in Japan long enough to remember. The longest we were there was around 6 months in the late 80s when I was still a baby. I was like 1 or 2 years old. My father had recently gotten hired to work for a Japanese company based out of Osaka with an office in San Francisco where he would be based out of. And actually, this year he just retired from that same company after over 40 years there.
Mm.
But way back, again, when I was still a baby, I wasn't old enough to remember any of it. We had moved to Japan for like 6 months, so it was more like an extended vacation.
Mhm. Mm.
So he could go through his in-person training, learn the language, that kind of stuff. I'm sure my parents have a lot of stories of their time there. For example, there was for one day they lost me at their apartment. I, for some reason, had found my way up to the second floor
Wow.
of the apartment building that they had lived in. But they had spent the whole day trying to look for me, asking neighbors and stuff, couldn't find me. That's one of the funny stories that they tell me, but like I said, I don't remember any of that.
Yeah.
Um, so my journey growing up as a Hafu was definitely, as I mentioned earlier, more American with many touches of Japanese. I wouldn't be the first person to, I wouldn't say I'm culturally Japanese in the same way as someone who, was born and raised there. Um, but there were many touches of it, many elements of Japanese growing up. My mom was a full time my mom was at home full time taking care of me and my sister while my dad worked. So she, of course, had a big influence on us at home, and many aspects of Japanese culture were a part of our lives. We took our shoes off at home. As kids, we watched a lot of shows, little kid shows like Anpanman.
Mhm.
That was probably the number one thing we watched. Doraemon, and then later shows like Pokemon, Digimon when we were a little older. Americans pronounce it differently. They say Pokemon and Digimon. And it was funny. I couldn't get away with saying things in the way that English speakers did. My mom would always correct me, even though growing up, like all my friends would pronounce those things differently because they were very popular here. So, and also, I was I would also see my mom watching her shows on TV when she would have her time to watch, and as well as like the music she listened to. So there was a local Japanese video store in San Francisco's Japantown. She would go there every week, rent those shows. Both she rent the kid shows for me and my sister, and then she would rent videos for herself, like J dramas and stuff like that, Japanese dramas. And then she would either watch those throughout the week or Saturday night. There was a local channel that would show NHK on Saturday night. She would watch that every weekend. And in the car, I remember, in addition to like popular bands like the Beatles and stuff like that, she had artists like Southern All Stars, Dreams Come True, bands that were really popular during her time that she had on either on cassette or on blank cassettes that she recorded off of CDs because the car didn't have a CD player. She would play those while she was driving us around because she'd have to take us to either school or appointments or whatever, and we would hear that stuff all the time. So that that kind of has an impact on you too. Of course, we ate Japanese food both for meals and snacks. Onigiri, I remember, was a real big one for us. Kind of a go-to snack when we would come home from school. So yeah, we have these elements of Japanese culture, but at the same time, when you live in America, you can't escape American pop culture. It's just all around you, and we absorbed that too because it was there, because all of our friends were part of it. So we watched American movies, American kids shows, American cartoons, that kind of stuff, Western music, all that stuff. American food, of course, we had plenty of that, and we loved it. Going to school generally, um, my mom would actually make us sandwiches most of the time when we would go to school. And I think while, again, I go back to my mom because she kind of was the source of all this.
Yeah.
But I think while she had maintained a lot of cultural aspects in her life, because she was the immigrant, she had immigrated to the United States. She, I think, had adapted more to the American culture and way of life than, like, say, my dad did with the Japanese culture that he married into. He adapted to, he likes Japanese food and stuff like that, but like my mom's English is like 20 times better than my dad's Japanese,
Mhm.
for example, and that kind of leads into language, right? That was probably the biggest thing that she had adapted to. She worked hard to learn the language, and she actually raised us more speaking English than in Japanese. So to answer the question on language, I do speak Japanese, but I do not speak or read it well.
Mhm.
Um, Not fluent, for sure. I can sound fluent, like I could do the proper pronunciation. That was something that we kind of had to do, or else we got in trouble. So I can apply like the Japanese accent maybe better than other non-native speakers. But that's about it, because then I get in trouble if I go to Japan and I sound fluent and then they respond to me like a native speaker. Then I'm just like, I don't know what to do
Hmm.
at that point in time. So at home we spoke English. My mom used short, simple phrases that we use daily. Or if she got upset at us, she would yell at us in Japanese because she wanted us to take her seriously, and she didn't think we would take her seriously if we yelled at her in English.
Hmm.
But we never really had full conversations in Japanese as a family. And yeah, also, my sister growing up had struggled to with speech and communication from an early age, and the speech therapist that she had growing up, apparently, and again, I didn't realize this until later on when my parents kind of shared this with me. Um, they had recommended that we only use one language at home, just to quote, not confuse her. I think in retrospect, that probably wasn't the best advice,
Hmm.
but that was just what we went with, and that kind of sealed the deal. So yeah, growing up, I think, as a kid, I think if I had absorbed more of that language in conversation, I think I would have been a better speaker. I studied Japanese in high school, and when I travel to Japan, it comes back pretty fast. I try to find, whatever opportunities I can to use it. So, for example, with my YouTube channel, here and there, I try to provide translations for certain Japanese video games, for example. That helps a lot, because it forces me to kind of use it.
Hmm.
But by and large, my Japanese is very elementary, if that makes sense. Um,
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. And I think it makes sense because you also grew up in the United States, and the place we live has a impact, I think, on our language for
Yep.
sure. And also the
Hmm.
education. I mean, I've also, when I was born in France, and at 6 years old, I moved to Japan. But the teacher I had in France also asked my mother to stop speaking in Japanese to me because it
Hmm.
would confuse me. And same thing
Hmm.
as your sister. I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
it's retrospectively, I think it was a mistake from the teacher to say that to my mom because,
Right.
but I think it was also the generation. Maybe at that time there was a bit close-minded. That's
Hmm.
my belief. I think I hope that today it has changed a little bit with now that
Yeah.
we have children too. You
Yeah.
told me, no, you have a son.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And I think when your parents hear that, they, I think, our parents have good intentions, and they
yes.
want the best for us. And so when they hear something like that, it's tough to shake. It's tough to ignore, I think.
Yeah.
And
It
yeah,
is true. It is
yeah,
hard
for
to
sure.
stay in it is hard as a parent to stay in our belief and do what we believe is the best for our children, especially when we have some advice from the authority, or teacher
Right.
or therapist. It's hard to challenge those. I understand, totally
Hmm.
understand.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
so thank you for sharing your experience growing up as a Hafu. So um, So maybe the question would be, okay, because you shared about different ways you had access to Japanese culture and to American culture. But how did you feel inside? I'm curious about more your feeling. How did you feel inside as a half? Did you feel different from
Yeah.
other, or no, it was not a issue for you?
Hmm.
How was it for you?
Yeah. So I think, well, there's multiple parts to it, I think. Um, so it's interesting. I grew up in San Francisco, right? And San Francisco, there are actually a lot of Asian people. And as a matter of fact, the neighborhood that I grew up in had a lot of Asian people, and the neighborhood schools that I went to growing up were actually majority Asian.
Mm,
Um, but they were all number one, they were mostly full Asian kids, so like not as many kids were mixed. Many of these kids that went to the schools I went to were children of immigrant parents themselves who had come to the US and had, San Francisco, California in general, just being a coastal city, when people come from Asia, California is usually the first place they go. And then they just kind of stay there, right? Um, anyways, in San Francisco, there were a lot of Chinese kids that I grew up around. I think that kind of made up the majority. There were others too. There were Korean kids, Vietnamese kids. There were Japanese kids, but not a lot, not many. There was actually a school in a different neighborhood that had a Japanese language program
mm,
that I think a lot of Japanese parents sent their kids. I didn't end up going to that school, and I also didn't end up going to that language program. Probably because my mom figured it would be too much work for me, which she was correct. Because I was actually very lazy growing up, something that I kind of wish I wasn't, but it is what it is. So I think that's kind of interesting. I'm mixed, but I'm also half Japanese. There aren't a lot of mixed kids, and there aren't a lot of Japanese kids either.
mm,
So I didn't have a lot of Japanese friends growing up, for one thing. I did have some. There were like a few that I ended up with, like, you find out the Japanese, like, oh my gosh, like I can connect with these people better, than somebody else. But yeah, also the funny thing was, um, my parents here and there would kind of like, when you're like a young adult and your friends try to set you up with like a partner
mm,
in dating. Well, my parents tried to set us up with other mixed kids from time to time.
mm,
So my dad, for example, had a coworker, a Japanese coworker, who she was married to an American guy also, and they had two kids that were half Japanese, half white, like me, and they were also kind of close to us in age, to me and my sister. So I remember we used to go on vacation together sometimes, and I think maybe they had tried to make it ever like, oh, you guys should be friends, because you're similar. That we never really became friends. We were just too different from each other. And I think that's the other thing too. It's tough when, like, people who are mixed, people who are Hafu, it's not as homogenous as,
mm,
say, like a group of immigrants from a certain country that all kind of share in something similar. Hafus are very different. They, have different interests, different personalities. As a matter of fact, most of the kids that were mixed that I learned later on were actually bullies. They were actually really mean to me.
oh,
Yeah,
wow.
strangely. Many of the half Japanese kids, especially in middle school, most of them were like really just mean, and they were mean to me, so I
Mm,
didn't want to have anything to do with them, sometimes. And um, so I think growing up, I felt different. Um, I felt like, I could never fully fit in. So I would try to pass off or think of myself as full Asian. Like, I'm Asian, right?
mm,
Not even like specifying, what kind of Asian are you, which we hear that a lot here in the United States.
mm,
Um, so, but I think also as a kid, you're you're also just trying to make it through life. So
mm,
you have these feelings, and I ended up making friends. I actually was kind of interesting though, because the friend groups I had for the most part were actually fairly diverse, I think. I met a lot of I became friends with a lot of different kids who were, very different. Like not one of them was quite the same as the other. So it's interesting how that all kind of worked out. And of course, as a kid, you're not really thinking too much about race. You're just a kid, trying to live life and
Yeah.
enjoy yourself, trying to do well in school, but really more than that, just trying to kind of live life in the best way you can, trying to, enjoy yourself before we enter this world of adulthood and responsibility.
Yeah. No, I think
So,
it's well
yeah.
said. I think it's really well said. As a child, we just focus. We don't even ask ourselves so many questions, I think, about our
Hmm.
identity. I think we just, as you say, we just try to make it through
Yeah.
life, make friends,
Hmm.
maybe fit in with the friends
Yeah.
we have, right? So I think,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thank you for that. And how is it now for you then? Now as an adult, as a father, as a spouse, what is your experience now being a multicultural?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's been a journey. And it was kind of a journey I didn't really get into until maybe 2016. So I moved to Southern California in 2005, after I graduated high school. And but again, kind of like as a kid, as a college student, I was really more or less just trying to make it, I guess. So I didn't really think too much about. There was a Japanese club that I joined that was actually kind of fun. And there was actually a Hapa club that formed one year, and I immediately joined that. And that was fun. But at the same time, college students, we get so focused on trying to finish school, trying to figure out what we're going to do after. So it was kind of like short-term excitement, but then nothing really came out of it. But in 2016, I think life had kind of gotten to me, and I wanted to do something interesting. And so I decided to really dig deep into exploring my identity, not only as someone who is Hafu, but also someone who is mixed race. And I think through listening and sharing with other Hafus, other mixed race individuals who I met along the way, I'll actually go into that in more detail later. Um, and yeah, also I did a lot of traveling. I met a lot of people from many places all around the world, through social media also. Yeah, I realized there were so many details within us, so many unique things from individual to individual. But at this, so many intricacies of that as well. And I think through that journey, sharing with people, hearing their stories, um, I started to kind of embrace more of who I was,
Mm.
growing more to accept it instead of wishing I was someone else or something else. And I think, specifics we'll go into later. As far as my connection to Japan, because this was actually pretty cool. Um, so up until 2013, the last time I had been to Japan was in 1995 when I was 8 years old.
Mm.
My mom took us there for 2 weeks, and that was crazy because we didn't have passports. We didn't know we needed U.S. passports. We had
Oh.
Japanese passports, so we could get in,
Mhm.
but our U.S. passports were expired. Or either that or we didn't have them. As so, by we didn't realize till we got to the airport, and we had already spent all this money on plane tickets and everything. So
Oh.
my dad had 2 weeks. So it was my mom taking me and my sister to Japan.
Mhm.
My dad had 2 weeks to get our passports processed and sent
Oh.
to the U.S. Embassy in Japan for us to pick up,
Oh, wow.
so that we could come home at
Two
the
weeks
end of
is a
the trip.
short time, 2 weeks.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and I remember I was 8 years old. My mom was I was 8 years old. My sister was 5, and it was an absolute nightmare for my mom having to having to hold both our hands as we walk through the crowded streets of Tokyo on the trains and
I can
everything.
imagine.
And not I obviously both of us didn't speak Japanese, so I'm just bothering my mom nonstop. What is this? What is that? What does this mean? And she looked like she was just about to lose her mind. On top of the fact that she was on the phone with my dad every day. What's the passport situation? What's going on with that? And so, but yeah, I got to reconnect with my family and stuff like that, hang out with my cousins. On my birthday, it flooded. There was a big monsoon and the streets flooded. And I ran out with me and my cousin. We ran out into the street with our shoes off, um, and our pants rolled up because we wanted to just run around in the flooded water. My uncle followed us out with his video camera, just started recording us because we were having such a good time. My mom and my aunt were just freaking out, like, you're gonna get sick, you're gonna catch a cold and stuff like that. But we didn't care. We had a blast. That was the last time I had been to Japan
Mm.
prior to 2013, so about 2 decades. And then I began traveling to Japan again, from 2013 up until the pandemic, basically. And the reason I did that was because my company at the time had a volunteer program for employees. And I had actually helped organize some volunteer efforts for the people in Tohoku after the March 11th
Mm.
tsunami back in 2011. I remember watching it and just being completely shocked at the whole thing, just the amount of destruction and devastation that had happened. And I felt compelled to not only go back, but, help in whatever way that I could. And so 2013, I went with the group and then I started organizing trips every year after that until like 2018 or something like that. And but that was special too, because I felt like I had really reconnected with the country that I hadn't visited since I was a kid. And personally connecting with the people there was even more special. Just being able to know that, we're making an impact on the lives of some of the folks here who were living in temporary housing, who lost their homes. Some people lost their family and stuff like that. And that was really tough. But at the same time, it was a really special experience. And I think it really helped me embrace more of my Japanese side after so much of my own life pursuits here in the US. And, but at the same time, when I'm in Japan, I still feel like a fish out of water. I don't, like I said, I don't speak the language well enough. I'm not as well versed in the culture. Like I'm more prone to making mistakes that I shouldn't be making there sometimes.
Mm.
And that's a journey I think I'm still on, and one that I don't think has a really clear end when you consider how Japan looks at people who are foreigners or even foreigners of Japanese descent. I know people who are full Japanese American who go to Japan and they just have no idea at all how to deal, how to, they don't know the first thing about being in Japan. They don't speak the language, and Japanese people too will always see them as foreigners, even if they're fully Japanese. Never mind someone who's mixed, kind of like myself. Um, but it's not all bad. I think, especially when you know that you're not alone. I had, like I said, I had shared in these experiences with other people later on. And I think having known other Hafus or even other Japanese Americans who have lived in Japan, I think that kind of helps being able to kind of draw on those experiences as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, and I think
mhm,
that's also, I mean, your journey is so interesting because you wanted to reconnect with Japan and through a good cause also, through helping people after the incident in 2011. So
mhm,
you were able to combine helping others and reconnecting with your culture, and so I think that's beautiful, and
mhm,
I admire you for that. And also you said that you connected with many other Hafus. I think it was in
mhm.
2013. Was it? Or
17, 17.
17
Yeah.
that you reconnected. And so I'm curious to hear what discovery did you make? Uh,
Mhm.
yes, after so many encounters.
Yeah. So yeah, 2017 was the Hapa Japan event in LA.
So can you
It was
remind us? Please, sorry, can you tell us what is Hapa event for those who don't know?
yeah, so Hapa Japan was a 5 day, it was 5 days long, I think. It was from like a Wednesday to a Sunday. And it started at the Japanese American National Museum, which is in Little Tokyo in LA. It's a very famous museum. It actually, there are a lot of exhibits on the internment of Japanese Americans who were living in the United States during the war. Um, and so that's a really big deal for people who come from that as well. But anyways, Hapa Japan. So it started there at the JANM, they call it, and then it finished at the University of Southern California. And it was basically like just this big gathering of Hafus, almost like the Olympics. Like if you were a Hafu, if you were half Japanese, you were there. Like famous half Japanese people were, so many of them were there, and it was, a collection of panel discussions, artistic showcases, music performances, interviews with different people, and there were I guess a couple lectures and stuff like that, a handful of them, particularly at the university event that took place on the weekend. That was kind of, and then they had more like famous musicians show up to the main event, like Keena Grannis, Marie Digby, pretty well known. And that was the thing, like it was just absolutely mind blowing. I remember I was just like, wow, this is so cool. Like you had academics, religious teachers, filmmakers, musicians, artists, television personalities, social media influencers, authors, poets, photographers, anyone who was well known in the Hafu space was basically there.
Wow.
And I was very fortunate to have met many of them, some of whom I became, pretty good friends with. For example, after the Hapa Japan event, I watched the Hafu documentary on Amazon.
Mm. I watch it too, yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and when I look at the credits list, I could pretty much kind of look at it and go, oh, yeah, I know that person. I know that person too, because it all kind of stemmed from that one event. A lot of the folks who were in that documentary were at Hapa Japan, for
Mm.
example. Um, and so yeah, that I just remember coming away from that like, wow, that was great. There hasn't been another one since. They used to have it every 4 years, kind of like the Olympics.
Okay.
And so,
Oh, I wish I
but
could
after,
go.
yeah, no, I think you would have loved it. It was such a great event, very well put together, and just a lot of people, so many stories, and yeah, I love music, as you can kind of see, kind
Yeah.
of the stuff behind me, and so I loved the music performances. I ended up becoming really good friends with Kat McDowell, who was one of the performers there, and she ended up, we ended up hanging out, and she ended up performing at my wedding a couple years ago, which
Wow.
was
Nice.
pretty cool. Yeah, and so I think from there, continuing onward, I think many of the people I had met and connected with, we continued connecting after that through social media and in-person meetups in LA, as well as other places too, like San Diego, Vancouver, Canada, even in Japan. If I would travel to Japan after that, I would meet up with some of the Hafus who were living over there.
Mm.
And I think aside from the regular fun things we did together, like going out to Japanese restaurants, karaoke,
Mm.
other things, um, I think we use a lot of that time and space to talk about kind of who we were, Japanese culture, our experience, our different experiences growing up, uh, some of the similar or unique struggles that we had as Hafu individuals. And through that, we all kind of made these many discoveries, both within ourselves and within the general experience of being Hafu. And knowing that not only helped us bond with each other, but helped us embrace ourselves a little bit more, I think. And yeah, I cherish those memories. I really do. It's so unfortunate we don't have a lot of these. I mean, Hapa Japan is not. I don't think it's happened since 2017. The pandemic kind of really changed things after that. And yeah, these days we don't have as many meetups. Many of us have moved forward. You know, we got married, started families, you know, including me. And so, but I hope through stuff like social media, we can continue to maintain some sort of connection. You know, maybe one day we'll have a big reunion or something like that. One day, maybe when we're
Yeah,
not so overwhelmed with the responsibilities of life that many of us
yeah.
have right now.
No, that would be
So,
great. That would
mhm,
be great to be able to organize a big meetup or start with small meetups wherever we are.
mhm.
At least that's my also my intention to meet some Hafus in Kansai region. I've also already
Mm,
connected with
mm,
some of them. But yes, and through
nice.
this podcast, I hope to meet many other Hafus like you, Ken,
Mhm.
and share some inspiration and some perspective. So yes, talking about some discoveries you made, would you like to share some of the discoveries you had with meeting with so many Hafus? For example, I don't know. You said you have different experiences. Of course, we all have different experience, but what would be maybe a few ones that really changed your perspective or confirm your perspective?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest one is not feeling fully Japanese, I
Mm,
think, is a very, very common, it's almost universal. I don't think I know one Hafu individual who has ever said, I'm just like every other Japanese person. And if they did say that, then there's something else going on.
mm,
You know, there's a lot of denial, I think, happening
mm,
at that point. Pretty much every Hafu who's been honest about the experience has said, yeah, like, you know, and especially most of us as Hafus have immigrant parents who
oui.
moved here from Japan, you know, and so it's we I think when your parents are immigrants, you know, they share more of their culture with you because it's still fresh. And we were all exposed to that. And we all, I think, had a tremendous amount of knowledge of what Japanese culture is, um, who, like, who we are as Japanese or Japanese Americans, I guess you could say. But at the same time, there's this identity issue that many of us are going through, and particularly in Japan, where like if we go there, it's like, oh, we're immediately seen as gaijin, we're immediately seen as foreigners. Um, and so yeah, there was that. That was definitely one thing that and it's almost it can almost turn into like a group therapy session. I think,
Yeah.
where we just talk about our struggles with you know, trying to please our immigrant parents or something like that, which is actually very common among Asian people, especially in America,
Mm,
Um, I think, yeah, that's probably the biggest one
mm,
that stands out. Um, I think, what are some other ones
mm.
that, yeah, I mean, that's really kind of the main one.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, again, I think also pretty much I think at the same I think while Hafu's acknowledge that, like we acknowledge the difficulty of being seen as Japanese, but we struggle with this identity. I think um, most of the Hafus that I connected with, at least, really do love Japanese culture. Like they really embrace it
Yeah.
at the same time,
Yeah.
you know. Like they all, we all love Japanese food. I mean, people in America in general like Japanese food.
Mm.
But we kind of take it to another level because it was such a big part of us growing up. I think that was the other thing too, is I think we all had similar experiences growing up. I think again, going back to like whoever the Japanese parent was who influenced us. So like, most of us took our shoes off at home as kids.
Yeah.
Most of us, were familiar with Japanese pop culture from the 90s, which, like from my age group at least, growing up in the 1990s, all the shows and music that was popular then, a lot of us were all were pretty familiar with that. And then coming of age in the early 2000s, I think so there were similarities in that too. It's like, oh my gosh, like you watched this show or you listened to this music growing up or you had this food, growing up as well. And it's like, oh my gosh, like we were like doom and glooming about our identity crises and our the issues it causes us mentally, but then at the same time we're like, hey, but we had all these other great things at the same time, growing up. The one very controversial thing is natto. We talked so much about that because that I know in Kansai that's generally like considered not like a lot. Pretty much everyone from Kansai I know doesn't like it. But
Oh, I love
I'm
it
not sure if that
personally. I love it
you love it.
personally.
Interesting. Interesting. Most guys I know from Kansai, they look at it and they're like, "Are you guys crazy?" But it people from Kanto, like in
Mm.
Tokyo, tend to really like it. My parents both loved it. Actually, the funny thing with my dad,
Oh, my God.
um, he likes to eat weird things. Um, and natto was one of those things. He had so when I didn't share how my parents met. My dad was an English teacher in Japan in Tokyo, and that my mom was a receptionist at the school that he taught at. Um, One of the experiences he had, I think with one of his students, I think, who took him out, and they said like you gotta try natto, and they were thinking like he was gonna spit it out
Mm.
because he was not Japanese, and but they were giving it to him as like a joke, like you just gotta try this once and just see like how you like it. And they're all just kind of laughing, just kind of waiting, like watch he's gonna hate this. But he eats it and he's like, this is good. And they were like, no, you didn't really eat it. Take another bite. And he did, and he's like, no, I did. I really like it. And they were just completely mind blown. They were just like, wow.
That's rare.
Uh, so I grew up around the smell of natto. Also, I didn't eat it that much as a kid because for whatever reason. But I'm very familiar with the smell. Both my parents love it. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, that was kind of a hilarious thing there because that was a controversial topic. You had Hafus that loved it, and you had Hafus that didn't. And it almost turned into like a very passionate uh, kind of debate.
Mm.
Like the ones who hated it like passionately said like I can't believe you guys eat that stuff, but
I
um,
see. Yes, no, that's interesting. That's very, but it's like I would say maybe like in the United States, maybe the peanut butter jelly sandwich or something like that. I was not never able to eat a peanut butter jelly sandwich, for example. Living 10 years in the States.
mm,
So
yeah,
I guess there are some foods that challenge us more than other.
yeah. Peanut butter and jelly is actually well. When I think of peanut butter and jelly, I think of like kids really like it. So you put it on like white bread and cut the crust off, and
Yeah.
uh, actually in the U.S. at least, I remember I didn't eat it that much, but I didn't hate it. It was generally pretty popular. The stuff that's controversial in the US, like anchovies, if I don't know if you've had anchovies or not,
No,
if
I
you know
don't.
what that
I don't know.
they're like little fish. They're like
Ah,
little salty fish. They like come in a jar. Some people like to put them on pizza in America.
okay.
Um, but they have us, or some people will put it in as like a salad ingredient. They're very, very salty, and they have kind of like a pungent kind of
Mm.
smell. Um, People who love anchovies, again, like my dad loves anchovies because he likes weird stuff like that. But some people don't like it. Like liver is another controversial one.
Mm.
Oysters are another
Yeah.
controversial one where it's like, yeah, but peanut butter and PB and J, we call it in the U.S. They abbreviate it because we're too lazy to say the whole word.
Mm,
um, yeah, that one. I think my mom might have even. My mom was so funny. That's the other thing too. Like Japanese people like to cut the crusts off their sandwiches.
mhm.
If you ever go to like a kombini, right? Japan, they have
Yeah.
those little sandwiches, right? And there's this thing about like cutting the crust off is kind of in the U.S. it's seen as kind of childish. Like you do that for kids, but if
Mm.
you're an adult, you're supposed to eat the crust, like an adult. But
Right.
if you don't want to eat the crust, it's like okay, well if you're a little kid, you can kind of get away with it. But my mom would always cut the crust off of hers, which was kind of interesting, even though she would always make us eat it. She would never cut the crust off for me and my sister.
Wow, okay.
We would always,
That's funny.
yeah,
Okay,
I
so
think.
thank you for that. And I'm
Mhm.
curious also. I know it was not the plan, but I'm curious because now you have a family on your own. Also, you have your wife and your child. And I know it's a multicultural family too. You said to me your wife is from Taiwan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep,
Uh,
that's right. Yeah.
and so how is it for you now? Your having a family. How do you navigate through these different cultures in your family?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's a journey in and of itself. I guess well, for one thing, my son at least, we're just trying to make sure he stays fed and sleeps at the right time.
Yeah.
We haven't given too much thought to uh, the intellectual stuff that he'll deal with when he's older, because all he does is sleep, eat, and we have to change his diapers and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so, yeah, I think, again, I think living in California, I think helps. Even my mom told me, she said, "Aren't you glad you live in California instead of Japan? Because life would have been so much harder for you because actually my parents didn't know where we were going to live when my mom was pregnant
Mm,
with me. That's why they gave me the name Ken, because it works in both countries very easily.
yeah.
Because they're like, well, I don't know where, because my dad had just gotten this job with that Japanese company, and they're like, well, maybe they'll let us stay in San Francisco because they have an office there. Maybe we got to move to Osaka or something like that or whatever. Um, and we ended up staying here, and so I think, yeah, I don't think too much about it. My wife is interesting because she was born in Taiwan but grew up in the Philippines
Mm,
at an American school.
okay.
So she's what they call a third culture kid, and
Mm,
there's other podcasts that discuss the issues with that. Um, I I've had a chance to I've known other people who are now kind of living that similar life, and they have kids of their own who are now going through the same thing. And it's interesting because your childhood, like I can at least say to people like I had an American childhood,
mhm,
you know, um, more or less. Um, going to an American school in a different country, that's an experience in and of itself. And so we both my wife and I have our own, like, I guess, issues within
mm,
that we have worked through. I think we haven't talked too much about it, kind of one on one.
mm.
And I guess for the same reason too, like, we got married, and then we had Kai, our son, and it's this like, well, we got to do all this stuff now. So how are we approaching it? I think for now we're just moving along, I think, for
Mm,
now. I think
mm,
while I think the commonality is like, look, we're living in the US, we have our kind of our community of people now that we who also have families of their own and stuff like that. And again, like the group of the community that I'm in now is very diverse. There's people from different cultures, different backgrounds. And so it's interesting when you're in that kind of environment. It's almost like yeah, that the mixed race things are, within you are there. But you're in such a diverse group. It's kind of, you don't quite know the first way of going about it.
mm.
It's so yeah, I don't think, come to think of it, I don't think we've really figured it out yet. And I think that might be a new journey that maybe we've just got to undertake.
Mm,
Um, and I was thinking about, my son, he's half Taiwanese, quarter Japanese, quarter white,
mm,
and his my in-laws spend more time with him because they live here. My parents still live in San Francisco, so they don't get to see him as much.
mm,
Um, but I do know that I want him to be exposed as best he can to all that is part of him. So, like, right now, like his grandmother, sings to him in Mandarin,
mm,
and he really enjoys that. I support that fully. I embrace that, and
mm,
at the same time, I want my family to be involved in it too. It's a little bit challenging because again, they're not here,
mm,
and they're doing their own thing right now back home. They've traveled down to Southern California once to see him, and but his connection with them is mostly just remote. I send videos to like my mom and stuff like that.
mm.
But I do. My hope is that like I'm like, look, you guys got time. You should come down. you know, my father's retired, and my mom is still taking care of the house. I'm like, you guys have time. You got money. Maybe come down and see Kai a little more often.
Mm,
And so, but I want him to be connected to his Japanese side too. I want him to at least be aware of and hopefully embrace those things. I think we've still got a little bit of time. Like I said, he's only 5 months old.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think he's really I
The
don't think
baby.
he's really thinking much of anything. Yeah,
You have time.
yeah, but
That's true.
he's growing up fast. That was the other thing I learned about being a father is like
Mm,
people say they grow up fast, and I didn't really know what that meant until now.
mm,
He really is literally growing up fast.
mm,
Because I still remember the day he was born, and I look at him now, and he's just absolutely nothing like the day he is similar, but he's so like he's grown so much already. It's
mm,
I didn't realize how fast babies grow. I never had to take care of a baby. I've never had one of my own. I've never had um, nieces or nephews that I was close enough with, to really kind of
mm,
see.
mm,
Um, and so yeah, I think it's gonna be tough though because the connection I have with my Japanese culture is not as strong as what my mom had, for example. So trying to pass that down, I think about it a lot. Like, how am I going to do this? Like, yeah, I have Japanese stories that I could read to him, but again, my language ability is not that good. I can make him Japanese food. That I can do. I'm pretty
Ah,
good at that. I
wow.
think.
That's great, already.
you know, yeah. I could have him watch shows on YouTube, for example. There's a lot of that available.
Mm,
And so there's some ways of doing it, but again, he's gonna have so many influence on top of growing up in the United States, where he's gonna be and growing up in a community like Diamond Bar in similar to San Francisco, Los Angeles is also very diverse. We have so many things here, and he's going to be everything that has nothing to do with him culturally, but because he lives here, he's gonna be a part of that too, and so it's I have no idea what things are going to be like, when he's finally old enough to kind of, sort of make his own decisions and understand kind of who he is. And I think, it's just a matter of like, well, we'll do our best,
Mm.
I think. But it's
Yeah.
I don't know how we're going to approach it. We're just going to have to kind of find out and see, I think.
Yes, and I think
Yeah.
that's really the key word here. We will do our best, and I think that's what
Yeah.
we do as a parent. We do our best with our children. There is no manual how to raise a child,
Yeah.
and even
Right.
less about how to raise a multicultural child. I don't think there.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, I'm not I'm pretty sure he'll speak English okay
mm,
because he's gonna grow up here.
yes.
How well he'll speak the other languages, we'll have to kind of wait and see. uh,
Yes.
because that's the thing about being a kid is like, I wish I took learning Japanese more seriously when I was younger.
Mm,
Um, I think looking back on it now, I think it would have been I'd be able to do so much more if if I was actually more at least conversational. But at the same time, I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I was just a kid. I didn't want to do anything other than have fun.
mm,
And like, my parents got me into karate, got me into martial arts to try to get me to do something productive. And I look back on it and I'm like, yeah, I respect it now, but when I was a kid, I didn't really care.
mm,
We tried to get us into sports or learning different things, and that's a tough thing about being a kid is like your parents want you to be, they want you to be somebody great, and they take all these steps, um and they put up all these boundaries, and I probably would have to do the same thing with Kai, especially now because there's so much, everything is so connected, you know, everything is so accessible now compared to how it was. I used to, we always joke with people like we couldn't just watch whatever we wanted
mm.
growing up.
It's true.
We had to wait until, you know, 5 o'clock for,
Yeah.
our favorite show to come on. And if we missed a moment, it was too bad, we couldn't rewind it and watch it, but
Mm.
now you can watch whatever you want. Um, and I guess I just like, I remember as a kid, like I didn't want to do anything that wasn't fun, and
Mm.
doing activities that make you better aren't always fun, I guess you could say. I was really into video games, for example, as a kid. I was really into just watching shows and stuff like that. And yeah, my parents couldn't understand that. They were like, what good is video games? I'm like, it's a lot of it. I just like doing it. It's so much fun, but yeah. And so I'm thinking about that with Kai too. It's like I want him to be, to be cultured and smart and well-rounded. At the same time, I know he's going to be a kid for a while, and all he'll want to do is have fun for a while. So it'll be how I'm going to handle that. We'll have to just kind of see what happens.
Yeah.
I think.
One step at a time, right? And it's
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
I think, as a couple, also that's some, I think, dialogues that's can happen within the
Hmm.
couple to decide, okay, what should we do? What should we
Yeah, right,
do for
right,
our child?
exactly.
So it's all, I think every journey is unique and different because each family
Hmm.
uh, chooses what's best for the child. And we do what we can. So my last question for you, Ken, I know
Yeah,
we have so much to share today.
yeah.
My last question for you, Ken, would be, so what would you like to say to people who maybe face challenges with their multicultural identity, if you had to?
Yeah, yeah, explore it.
Mm.
Um, that's really kind of the main thing. And I know, like, for me too, at one point, it was unimportant. And I think for a lot of people who are mixed, it may seem unimportant. Life happens, and we're all trying to kind of do the best we can, working, raising families, and achieving things. And for a while that was the case with me. Even my parents said, don't worry about it. They said, you are who you are. Your race doesn't define you. It's almost like an American. It's very American to kind of say that because we're so diverse here, and I think there's a little bit of truth to that. Like, I don't think your race defines who you are fully. Um, and I think people mean well when they say that. My parents certainly, my dad did in particular. They're just like, yeah, like, you being mixed shouldn't stop you from being you.
Mm.
But I think it's not healthy to simply push it aside as unimportant because it is a part of you. It is who you are. And I think it's important to understand that. I think there's a lot of unique things that we as multicultural individuals feel and experience that people who aren't multicultural do not. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And I know that because both my parents didn't really understand it when I went on this journey. They're just like, okay, well, good for you, I guess, you know. But it's a big part of who we are, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And I think we need to understand it so that not only can we be more aware of it, but so that we can actually better embrace who we are and overcome the negatives like stereotypes, like microaggression, or just the general identity crises we feel. Microaggressions was a big term that I learned on this journey. I
Mm.
didn't know what it was, but I heard it all the time in these multicultural circles.
Mm.
And that's a pretty big deal. You start to realize, like, wow, I went through some of that too. I didn't know what it was, but now I do know. And now
Mm.
that I understand that, I can better process maybe these other feelings that I had once had that maybe have an impact on me today. So it's important, I think, to explore that. Some, I think, also feel intimidated by that journey, and it's a long journey. It was for me, and there's a lot to it. I think that takes a while to go through, but I'll say that it's one of the most fulfilling things, one of the most exciting journeys that I certainly took. And I think, you take it kind of like everything else, like parenting. You take it one step at a time. Don't go it alone. Find a community on social media. There's so much out there now, especially now. Like, I think it was harder before, but now because of everything we got, it's so easy to find community of people. Whatever mix you are, I'm sure there's a community out there that has it, that's available, like on Facebook or
Mm.
wherever. Yeah, but connect with others who are kind of going through the same thing as you. Don't go to, you don't have to go it alone. It's probably better off that you don't, go on this journey with others who can share in your experience. And on the other side, there's so much you can do with it. Mixed race circles are some of the most expressive circles that I've ever seen and been a part of. I think the amount of artists that I have met who have leveraged what they have discovered about themselves into their chosen craft is astounding. And I think being a part of that, is fulfilling. It's, even if you may not believe so now.
Mm.
And Yeah, so I definitely treasured that. And I encourage, people who are mixed race to do the same. I also think too that it's important because I know people like mixed race couples, or like people who aren't mixed but they married somebody else, and they had children who are mixed. I see a lot of that now,
Mm.
and I think from a practical standpoint, I think it's also important for parents of mixed race kids to understand that, this is a journey that they should encourage their kids. And I share this a lot with uh, some people that I know who have them. I think that's valuable too, because again, I think growing up, and I think a lot of parents from, my parents' generation were kind of the same way. They're just like, well, and part of it could be too that, oh, there was so much racism in the 50s, you know, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. There's in the United States, especially, just one racial issue after another, and then finally, after once we got to the 80s and 90s, things started to kind of cool up, but you know, racism doesn't end. At that point, it's
Mm,
still there. It's just not well, unfortunately, it's kind of coming back with what's going on in the world today, unfortunately.
mm,
But I think, but I think with our parents, I think having come out of that, I think maybe some of them were trying to like, look, we're past that now. Your race doesn't define you. So you don't have to worry about that now. Like maybe we had to worry about or something like that because we don't want you to deal with that. We want to give you a better life, that kind of stuff,
yeah. Mm,
just kind of speculating. I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate, but um, I think it's important for parents now, especially to kind of understand that like, hey, your child is probably going to go through things that you didn't go through,
yes.
um, and I think it's important that you encourage that child to one day explore that, one day, and don't dismiss it, like if a kid is saying like, hey, I'm at school and the kids treat me different, you know like with me, like if you're going to school with a bunch of kids who are full Asian and they don't treat you the same way, that's something I think parents need to talk with their kids about, if they have a kid who's mixed race. And yeah, kind of a new thing for me that's kind of near and dear to me as well, and even more so now that I have my own that I have my own son. So yeah,
Yes.
exploration and encouraging that exploration, like really, that's what I would say, kind
Mm,
of in general.
yes. Thank you so much, Ken. And I think it's very important also to, yes, I think to remember this context that yes, more and more couples are multicultural, multiracial, and so they have a
Hmm.
children
Yeah.
who are mixed like us, and
Hmm.
I really love what you said because it's also something very dear to my heart to think about those children,
Hmm.
and to create a space for them too to be able to for them to explore and to understand what they're going through. And I think as a Hafu, you and me, we
Hmm.
have, I think, this ability to understand our children, what they will go through. Of course, they will have their own
Yeah.
unique journey, but
Hmm.
we might be able to, we might be equipped to understand and better. And I hope we can also help others, families, also.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure.
hopefully they will listen to this podcast too, the parents also of Hafu children or multicultural children. And yes,
Hmm.
thank you so much, Ken, for your time today. I really loved our
Of course.
conversation. I learned so much about you, and I'm sure your journey will inspire with other Hafus. And yeah, and so thank you so much, Ken. Thank you for your time again.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Yuko. This is it was my absolute pleasure to be a part of this, and yeah, I'd love to be part of more discussions in the future if we have any.
Mm.
I think there's a lot to share. I think this whole experience, and yeah, I know time is limited and stuff like that, but yeah, no, it was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for you. And yes, we will continue this conversation, I'm sure, in the future. And hopefully we can meet in person also in Japan or United States or somewhere else.
I'd love that. That would be great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy
Thank
your
you, Yuko.
evening.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.